let's create the rest of our tables. Go into your terminal and type in the command railsg migration initial schema. So whenever I create a new Rails application and I want to create the foundation, so essentially creating all of my other tables, I like to name it initial schema. You can name it whatever you'd like, but this is going to create a file essentially just like what Devise did for us. So just how Devise had created a migration called Devise create users, what this railsg migration command is going to do is create a migration file for us, and then we can manually start creating a table and all of the columns to go with it. So switching back to our terminal, just hit enter and then go into our text editor and search for initial schema, and now we're going to have a blank migration file. So what we can do is create table of stories. So I'm going to create a stories table and create a column called body and include the timestamps for it. And so what this is doing is creating a stories table, and that table will have a body column, and the type of that column will be text. Now there's a few different types of columns that you can have. I'm not going to cover all of them, but essentially what you can do here is do t and say date time and have a created at column here if you'd like. So there's a few different options that you can choose from for the type of column you want to create. In our case, we're going to say text. And what t.timestamps does is it creates two columns really. It creates a created at column and an updated at column for the table. So anytime you create a new story, it'll be timestamped and show when that story was created. Now let's create another table called categories, and categories will have a string column or a name column and of type string. And the difference between a text and a string is normally, what I like to use them for is one-liners. So here is just a name that's probably never going to be too long. A story could be 5 or 6 paragraphs, and so I like using a text field there. Let's create table, comments, and comments will have a body, so just like our stories table, and it'll also be timestamped so you know when people leave comments. And here I'm just going to type this in first. Reference comments story index true. And what this is doing is saying for our comments table, create a reference of the story table on it. So essentially what this is going to do is do integer story ID. And the reason we index it is so that if a comment should be updated, you'll still see that in whenever when you're showing a story. So if you don't index it, if somebody goes through and changes the comment and updates it, then you may not see that reflected whenever you are showing the story. So let's just say the comment changes and you're looking at one of the stories. That story you might not see what changes happen. You might just show only the old comments, and that's not good. And so let's add in a few more references here. I'm just going to copy these. And so our comments will also index or reference a user. So this will create a user ID on the comments. And so let's just say the user decides to change their name. Well, you'll see that reflected whenever you are looking at a comment. So kind of same deal here up in the story here. Now we'll have stories, and the story will have a user Same deal here. If a story has a user and the user's name changes, that change will be reflected, and you'll be able to see that if you're looking at a story. So if you say story was created by Jay Lee, and now I change my name to, we'll just say Matt Lee, well, if you look at who it's created by, it'll show Matt Lee. And then stories here, category. Same deal here. If category changes, it'll be reflected in the stories whenever you're looking at a story. So good. So I think this is a good starting point for us. What we can do is rake db migrate. So whenever you want to run a migration file, all you'll have to do is just do a rake db migrate. And that'll create all of our, or it'll run all of our migrations that haven't been ran yet. And now if we go back into our schema and we scroll down, you'll see that it created our categories table, our comments table, our stories table. So it created all of these tables, and you can see here it add index. So essentially what that add reference did was add index comments of user ID or story ID and then user ID right here. And you can see that we didn't manually do this in our initial schema. So our comments table, we didn't do any of that there. But by adding a reference, it did add these two columns for us and had this extra add index here, saying that we want to index these story and user tables to our comments table. So there we have it. This is kind of laying the groundwork for the rest of our application. In our next lesson, we're going to create the models and create the associations for all of these tables.